An article by the Harvard Gazette found that the American Library Association documented almost 1,300 attempts to ban or restrict books about LGBTQ issues. PEN America corroborated this statistic, finding that in 2022, that year had the highest number of books being challenged in the last 2 decades. A whopping 45.5% of almost 2,600 books, all of which were written about or by LGBTQ people. The number of targeted titles are increasing because the tactics groups are making to censor these books have changed. Instead of censorship or restriction focused on single books, the majority are instead focusing on multiple titles, with 40% of cases calling for bans of hundreds of books. The sexual content of these books is the advertised reason why these groups are censoring these books, but the real reason is to prevent children from reading about LGBTQ people and their lives, according to an investigation by the Washington Post. Queer literature is heavily underrepresented in libraries around the world. Quality isn't the reason for this. If queer literature is represented in both public libraries and in schools, this would allow people in and out of school to be educated or taught ways to disrupt colonial standards that have been integrated into our education. Queer literature is underrepresented for the same reasons queer people are underrepresented. The larger population doesn't care about the minorities' problems. Many people try to invalidate queerness in society today with the argument that it isn't natural or is some kind of modern creation, but this couldn't be more false. For centuries, indigenous societies throughout the world have practiced things that would now be considered queer.
The idea of being what is now considered non-binary has been around for hundreds of years in indigenous communities. This is something that indigenous communities call Two-Spirit, which encompasses many of the facets of gender fluidity. This is important because this is proof that gender fluidity isn't a modern concept, but is something that has been part of indigenous culture for hundreds of years before the term non-binary was created.
Many people claim that gender is a binary, that male and female are only 2 genders someone can be. But when we look at history, and specifically at indigenous history, we can find that gender was a fluid in many indigenous communities, gender being a binary was something that was forced upon the natives by colonizers. The reality is that gender being a binary is an idea that was forced upon people who didn't at all believe in the heavy-set gender roles or expectations placed upon specific genders in European culture. Thankfully, people today are much more understanding of gender being a spectrum and queerness in general. Queerness today is significantly more accepted than it was hundreds of years ago. The world continues to make leaps of progress and acceptance, and the more we as people learn to accept our differences, the more we as people can learn to love each other. Despite these positive changes, many schools today, especially in early education, like elementary school and middle school, neglect teaching their students about gender and queerness. That is why we reached out and got into contact with someone who works at an elementary school, and this is what they had to say.
Well, I went to the library today and I did some searches. I did a search on queer and I did a search on Native American. The Native American search resulted in, I didn't count them, but probably at least 20 different books that touched on the subject of Native American people. And the queer search gave me 2.
Before we get into the questions, I'd like to acknowledge the Sese Vitum, the first people of this ancestral and unceded territory of
Sesavenga and their descendants, who are citizens of the Fernandinho Tataviam band of Mission Indians. And as for you, the land that you are on was originally a hunting and gathering ground belonging to the local Miwok inhabitants. Okay, so just to kind of summarize everything, let me turn on my camera so that you see who I am. Okay, there you go. Hello. So the goal of this project is to raise awareness for the lack of sufficient reading materials about queerness and indigeneity being provided to students. Insufficient reading materials, thus not a sufficient education, causes students early on to lack the ability to articulate the importance of being seen. A single quote from an article by John Weiner, William Sekastoa, Gilbert, and Lewis Lockhart states, "Issues of culture, language, cognition, community, and socialization are central to learning. Clearly, education today would benefit from integrating what is called culture-based education. It positively impacts student socio-emotional well-being and test scores for all students, especially those with low socio-emotional development. Teaching in ways that disrupt colonial standards that have been integrated into its education would deconstruct heteronormativity and create safer places for closeted students." Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So I wanted to show you a few slides that I put together that also used for the presentation that me and my classmate did. So this book right here, it's kind of a book that we found that would be present at like your elementary school. And so it does a lot of cool things. It kind of encompasses like 250 children's chapters, informational books, picture books with queer content from around the world. And the age group, of course, would be 12 and under. And it does a lot of really cool things. And then this book right here is really cool. Is one that I read for my comics class. So it's kind of a comic book, so like a comic novel, really. And it's really cool because it kind of revolves around two adolescent girls, and it's not necessarily for people this in this age bracket, but I think it would be very interesting to kind of test out and see what how children of this age, if they read this, what they would think. And to be honest, one of the big reasons why I think that would be really interesting is because the internet and social media allow children to prematurely expose themselves to these topics that are rampant in misinformation. So why not actually educate them in these topics? And so this one right here is unfortunately something that we probably wouldn't normally see at a elementary school or even middle school. And we see here, which is really interesting, just the difference in kind of reception of this type of book would get. And the top right here is somebody who's very much kind of against this book and what we what we see, and the advertised reasons is why we don't see queer books in libraries, public libraries, schools, is because it has sexual content. But really the reason is because these groups don't want to expose their children to what they deem just not normal, basically, or they're fearful of it. And then this one right here is something that one of my classmates kind of said that this would also be a very good reading material here, and I definitely agree. As this little blurb right here is the author herself mentioned the inspiration of The story was significant to other transgender brother, confirming that this queer story, LGBTQ plus story, the word mermaid in the context of the story is a substitute for Julian's gender identity, which is really, really cool. Okay, so I've definitely talked enough here. So why don't we get into what you're gonna say here? So I've gotten through the slides here. I'm gonna stop sharing, and then I'm gonna start asking you some questions. All right?
Okay.
So the first thing is I just want you to kind of introduce yourself. So like, what is your name? Where do you work? What your position is at work, and how long have you been working there?
All right. My name is Kristen Geller, and I work at Vallecito Elementary School in Terralinda, San Rafael. And my job here is a health specialist.
Great, thank you. So my next question is something that is very cool that exists at your school, which is something that we kind of talked about over text, is DEI, the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at your library. Because of this significant program, what are the types of books that you have found there? So now we can get into the kind of books that you found there.
Okay. Well, I went to the library today and I did some searches. I did a search on queer and I did a search on Native American. The Native American search resulted in, I didn't count them, but probably at least 20 different books that touched on the subject of Native American people. And the queer search gave me 2. However, when I talked to the librarian, she was able to find one more that was a great book, but it didn't come up under the word queer. So I wonder if I had searched under a different word, I would have gotten more. I'm not sure, but we are an elementary school, so, it's for whatever reason, I think they limit books that have to do with sexual content, like you were saying.
Gotcha. Great. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, definitely really interesting. Let's move on to the next question. Being around so many different children, do you think providing books with Indigenous and queer representation would benefit them?
I do. I think, to be inclusive, diversity, equity, and inclusion, which my school and most of the schools around here work really hard to be good at. And we're always learning about that and how to be better. But I do think it's very important because when a student sees himself in a book, they feel good about themselves. So that's really important for every single kid to experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Being seen is very, very important. Great. Yeah, so I have 2 more questions. So the next one is, what is the general consensus? I guess you kind of already mentioned this among the staff that providing. So if you were to say, like, speak for the general consensus among the staff, do you think that everybody would usually say that agree with your reasoning and perspective about providing these books to students would in fact benefit them?
I do. I think most people around here were very lucky. That topic is very important to us. We do try to hear our students and see our students and meet them where they are and offer resources for them. I was speaking with my librarian today, and she was talking about how lucky we are in California, especially Northern California, Marin County. The librarian before her retired and moved to Florida, and she actually got a job there as a librarian in Florida, and she said it was a different world there, and that a lot of books are banned there that we would not ban here. And she was very disappointed by how people try to control and kind of stamp out ideas that they're not comfortable with. And I'm sure that's true in a lot of states, but here we are very lucky.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. If that mindset and kind of just, the shared mindset of how important this is, if that was like a nationwide mindset, like the amount of kids that would definitely benefit from that is, I think, really astounding. And then really the last thing that I have to say or ask you is kind of is there anything that you would like to add or anything that we kind of haven't touched on yet?
I don't know. I just, I don't know. I'd have to think about that. I'm sure I'll think about something later that I wanted to add.
It's okay. I think that.
Did you want me to show you some of the books that I found?
Oh, yes, please.
Okay.
Yeah, show me the covers and.
Yeah. So this book, Rainbow Revolution, is a book that I think would be good if a student had a report to do and they were looking for somebody in the LGBTQ community to write a report on, because it highlights 50 different people and who they are and what they did. Mm-hmm. And so I think it would be good for a report, but it's not the kind of book where you would just pick off the shelf for a story and read and find yourself in. You know what I mean? This book is called Sylvia and Marcia Start a Revolution. And it starts off talking about Sylvia and Marcia, who are good friends, and they're walking down the street together, arm in arm, and they start helping people that they see that they need help. And then a little, more details get uncovered as the story goes, and it turns out they're transgender women, and then they actually do a lot of work to help other transgender women. So it's a really nice story, and I think it's a story that you would find on the shelf and then find yourself in if you read it. So I like that. In terms of Native American books, The Boat Ride with Lillian Two Blossom. Probably can't see that. Okay.
Lift it up a little bit.
And was that back up?
Yeah, lift it up a little. Yeah, there we go. You can see a little better. Yeah. Thanks.
It's a nice story about two, like a brother and a sister. He's fishing and she's tending to the goat, and she's asking him all these questions about, what makes a rainbow and what else? Just, things about the world that don't make sense to a child. And it turns out that, this old, wise Native American woman takes them on a boat ride and kind of tells them about all of those things, about the earth and how things work and why they're important. And so that's a great one. Fry Bread is about making bread, but not just making bread. It's about spending time with your loved ones and making community.
Yeah, that's really important. Yeah,
it's really important to Native American culture and a lot of other cultures too. But it's a really nice book about why people have traditions. This time of year, we have a lot of traditions that people love. So it's a very relatable book, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Yeah. And then The Dragonfly's Tale. I didn't really read this one, I read a little bit. But what I really liked about it is the illustrations. So as a kid, I really went for the books with the great illustrations because I like to look at the pictures more than I like to read. And there's a lot of words in this one, but I think it draws people in because the illustrations are so wonderful.
Yeah, wow.
And
It's beautiful.
and kids like dragonflies, and I think it's intriguing for those reasons. And I think it has a lot of history in it, and it's about a boy and girl also who find a dragonfly and they don't know what it is, and then there's a whole story behind where the dragonfly came from, and it's really cool. So at any rate, those are the books I found, and this one applies, I think, to everything, which I think we have a lot of books in the library that apply to you could apply it, like, depending on who you are, you could apply it to yourself, and those books are really great. This one is called Red, a Crayon Story. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's basically, if you look at it, the paper on the crayon is red, but the crayon itself is blue.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just a wonderful book. I would highly recommend it to anyone, especially anyone with a learning difference too, because sometimes, people are trying to judge you based on what they see, and that's not always who that person really is, So, anyway.
Yeah,
Those are the books I found today.
fantastic. Yeah, great catalog. If only that catalog was shared nationwide, that would be really excellent. But yeah, it's really heartwarming to see that catalog at your elementary school, and that's really great. And yeah, thank you so much. That's all I have. So yeah, I think that's it, unless you have anything else to add. But thank you so much for sharing those books and talking with me and doing this little interview. Really
All right,
appreciate
my
it.
pleasure.
Yeah. All right. That's it then. Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Despite there still being a lot of misrepresentation in the queer community and underrepresentation being a big issue for us, we can make bounds and leaps towards accepting queer communities around the world, and we continue to do so each day. Society has gotten a lot better about the acceptance of queer communities and the acceptance of Indigenous people. Indigenous people and queer people are still misrepresented and underrepresented by the media, but each day we can take steps to fight towards colonialism's impacts and become a better society that loves each other more.